wish we were chasing waterfalls somewhere in North Carolina. And I wish I was holding your hand while your hand was holding mine.
This is John with Tailwaters Fly Company, and I'm here today to continue our discussion on periodical cicadas. This was originally set to be a book review of Dave Zielinski's book, Cicada Madness, but I think you can probably better characterize it as a full-fledged endorsement. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my experience fishing the hatch, which really translates into why you really need to read this book. First, I'm no expert, and before last year, I'd read the Fly Fisherman magazine article, I'd seen that video that Blaine was in, and I'd seen a lot of stuff on Instagram, but a lot of it just really didn't seem within reach, to be completely candid. Last year I heard Dave on a podcast, sounded interesting, piqued my interest, and I knew I didn't have a lot of personal time to fish the hatch last year, but I bought the book anyway and just devoured it. It's not a hard read. It's extremely well summarized. And, I've heard that if you really understand something, you can condense it into one page. And while Dave hasn't taken that extreme, it is a really well summarized, well condensed read. The one thing I'll say is that after reading it, I was a little confused because I'd spent $30 on a book. I'd put a few hours into reading it. I'd pulled up a few maps, and what I thought I understood contradicted about 99% of my Instagram feed. And unfortunately, a fair amount of that content came directly from fly shops. Um, so, the first thing that I think all of us should kind of recognize is that this is a domain with very few experts. These bugs have evolved to confuse and evade predator populations, and that tactic seems to work on anglers too. Most fly fishermen are pretty stationary. They don't travel to fish this hatch every year. So what most people experience is this happening once, they've got great fishing, and then they kind of sit around and dream about it and cross their fingers for 13 or 17 more years. So most fishermen and even great fishermen have pretty limited experience when it comes to this hatch. So maybe just to pull a few major points from Dave's book to pique people's interest and provide a little bit of context. There's a number of different species of periodical cicadas, but you can kind of think of them in terms of 13-year and 17-year broods. They spend the vast majority of their life kind of in and around tree roots underground. What's important about that as anglers is that if you're looking for periodical cicada fishing opportunities, you probably want to do it in an area that has trees that are at least 13 or 17 years old. The bugs emerge in the kind of late spring, early summer, depending on where you're at, and it's really driven by soil temperature. And when you sit back and think about it, the soil temperature in East Tennessee, for example, can be very different than the soil temperature in Pennsylvania. It can be different at different elevations, and it can be different due to weather conditions. So specifically, warm rains can kind of accelerate cicada emergences. Cicadas crawl up trees, they emerge from their skins, and they kind of sit there and mature. And that can take up to about a week. So as anglers, if you see pictures posted online of bugs coming out of the ground, the first step is to kind of calm down. It may take a week or two for the fishing opportunity to kind of coalesce. So once the bugs start flying, unlike annual cicadas, periodical cicadas are really bad flyers. So the first thing to keep in mind is that they're not going to travel really long distances. If you're looking to fish cicadas, look in areas near where they have emerged. And then the other thing is that a lot of them fly onto the water and provide a fishing opportunity, obviously. That's why we get excited. Dave's book has great tables and maps with geographic ranges of different broods. And to kind of steal something that I talked about with Matt Riley, and these are more his words, but you know, periodical cicadas are not some mysterious thing. They're kind of like tides or moon phases. You can predict within a certain range of where cicadas are going to emerge any number of years out. So if you looked 50 years out, you could kind of sit down now and start planning your cicada trip. So what can be hard is just kind of the uncertainty in specific data and details. And what I mean by that is you may have a lot of confidence that there is going to be an emergence in a specific county near a specific lake, but you may not know if bugs are going to be on a specific cove or a specific stretch of river or on one side of the bank or the other. So there's limitations to data collection. There are changing conditions. Some trees get cut down and developed, and there's nuances to reporting. So certain studies or observers may have traveled certain areas more than others. And one thing you'll realize if you look at some of this is that there are definitely bugs in areas that don't have a lot of reporting because there's pretty sparse populations of people. Um, Dave's book is also great in that it talks through fly patterns, gear, and all of that good stuff in a lot of detail. And it gives you a really good list of resources that are publicly available. So you can sit down and look at maps of different broods and kind of plan out trips and even kind of look at where people have been seeing them on the fly. There's a number of kind of citizen scientists reporting um, organizations and groups out there. So life really just didn't give me the time to really fish this hatch last year, but Dave's book pointed me in the right direction and instilled a lot of interest. So one day when we were visiting my in-laws last year, I got kind of a half day to explore. I didn't have a boat, which I knew would be a big handicap in fishing, but I really wanted to just go see it. And it turned out that the book worked. I found bugs on multiple lakes. One was really muddy. Another one I found clear water, but in places that were fishable from the bank, the carp just hadn't turned on to the cicadas yet. Dave talks a little bit about this in his book, but I have this very vivid memory of hiking through a wooded park, through the sound of cicadas, seeing them all around me, finally coming out, finding clear water, seeing cicadas twitching on the surface, and looking at one that was floating above a mudding carp that had no interest whatsoever in it. So it really just kind of nailed home to me the fact that just because bugs are there does not mean that fish have turned on to them yet. Um, it was really frustrating to see so many variables that had come together, but just not that last one. One thing that was really cool though is that I later learned that one of the bodies of water I was on was one that Dave had gone to and Matt Riley had also gone to fish. So that instilled a lot of confidence in me and also I think really speaks to the quality of information in Dave's book. So armed with a little confidence and some great information from Dave's book, I sat down this year to plan my periodical cicada trip, knowing that I'd have a little bit more time to actually fish it. So just kind of talking through that process, the first thing I did was to look at some maps and come up with a rough idea of where to focus. Obviously, a key part of that was figuring out what brood was emerging in 2025, which is brood 14, and that's a 17-year cicada. So I talked to folks, fishermen or not, and specifically, given that it's a 17-year cicada, about what they saw in 2008. And people were pretty forthcoming, to be completely honest. It was pretty helpful. Um, Also, in terms of timing, I made a few poor attempts at reading ground temperature with a 6-inch kitchen thermometer, which is too short to measure what is actually going on with the cicada emergence. But it gave me something to do. What was more helpful is I looked at various kind of citizen science reporting, Cicada Safari, and iNaturalist to figure out when cicadas were emerging, so I could really, really hone in on the timing with confidence. Um, Once I saw they were emerging, again, knowing that it took some time for them to mature and even longer for them to fall in the water and start having fish key in on them, took a deep breath, and then I got in my car and actually drove around. I'd planned some spots that I thought could be interesting and potentially have cicadas and present some good fishing opportunities. I drove to those spots. I didn't pick one, I picked several, and I found some spots that looked pretty promising and, more importantly, sounded pretty promising because you could definitely hear the buzz of cicadas. And then the last step in the process was actually just going. So the first Saturday that my daughter was out of school, we got in the boat and went to one of the locations I had found, and got out to see if the fish were on them yet. If we struck out, I figured we'd have a really fun day seeing some cool bugs, and we'd come back in a few days or a week. But interestingly, we did not strike out, and we had a really special day together. I'll kind of skip over most of the corny stuff, but I will say we spent a fair amount of time saving cicadas that we found on the surface, and then also picking up trash that we had found floating around post Helene. But in terms of fishing, and in case it's helpful in describing to people what to expect and what to look for, we candidly floundered for a little while. We rode around different banks. One thing which is obvious in retrospect, but where trees had been cleared back from the lake, there were fewer cicadas. Another thing to know is that there were definitely areas that had a lot of cicadas, and as you rode down the bank, there would be very distinct, almost lines where you would move from a high concentration of bugs to a very low concentration, or finding no bugs at all. So if you just rode down the bank and fished it equally, um, you would you would be kind of wasting your time. There are certain areas that definitely have a higher concentration of bugs than others, and what we found is that carp were cruising those spots more consistently, and other fish were more concentrated in those areas. So, um, be on the lookout and observant in terms of specifically where, even along the same bank, you're seeing and hearing cicadas. Another thing that I'll point out is that, it wasn't a free for all, it wasn't a striper blitz. You may see what we were seeing was the occasional rise here and there, but even that was pretty tough to spot. More than that, we just kind of happened to be uh, far enough from the bank that we would see cruising carp, and the water was clear enough that we could do that. And even if we didn't see them eat a bug, if we splatted a fly down in front of them, a lot of times they'd come up and show some interest. And we were lucky enough to see several. We missed more than we hooked, but we caught a couple and had a really good day. We were able to take my wife Mandy back the next day, and candidly, it was a lot easier with two people in the boat, one to kind of manage it, and one to fish. But we basically cruised the bank, knowing specifically where to target this time, and looked closely for cruising carp. When you saw them, you just tried to get your fly in front of them. There's some nuances. If they're too close to the boat and facing the boat, a lot of times they can spook. So if you can angle it such that they will face away from the boat or at least a fair distance away, that can be pretty helpful. But it's candidly not rocket science once you figure out where the bugs are. And having the right light conditions and water clarity is kind of another big factor. But um, we had another great special day. It wasn't, 100 fish in the boat by any means, but it was really cool to have kind of pieced all this together based on the research and legwork that we had done, and just go out together as a family. It was a pretty big deal. One kind of funny thing that uh, we both observed is that carp are really bad at feeding on things on the surface, and so you'll see this with the naturals where they'll swim up and kind of flounder around on the bug and may or may not take it and may circle around and come back for it or just swim off and look for the next one. But as an angler, it's very trying to sit there while the carp tries to suck your fly down for the fourth time and swims off, and you don't know if it's because of the fly pattern, something you did in the boat, or if it just would have done that to a natural. But it's kind of a fun thing to observe in person. So if you have any interest in this at all, um, a really easy way to tackle an often misunderstood fishing opportunity is Dave Zielinski's book. Candidly, it's only $30. It's laid out extremely clearly, and it's a pretty short read with lots of good pictures, tables, and maps. And, candidly, if you know something really well, you don't need 1,000 pages to explain it. And so clearly Dave knows this very well. It's not a huge time investment to read. So it's well worth it from my opinion. We carry it. You can buy it from, I'm sure, a number of other sources. But do yourself a favor, even if you don't buy it, just borrow it from somebody, just read it. It's a very insightful book on a topic that is pretty misunderstood in the fly fishing industry. One other thing I'll mention is that I was able to fish recently with Matt Riley. And if you're interested in this, whether you read the book or not, if you want to go out with somebody who really knows what they're doing, I would reach out to him. There are very few guides that specialize in this hatch, and Matt is one of them. We had a great day, and the biggest carp that I caught was 18 pounds. So, highly recommend fishing with Matt. Again, unfortunately, there's a lot of kind of misleading information out there. And this is one really good, clear resource that is helpful and provides good information that, um, you know, was able to elevate me from knowing absolutely nothing about this 2 years ago to being able to plan my own trip and find bugs, find fish, and share something special with some people in my life. So, highly recommend it and hope you enjoy. One thing that I'd really like to emphasize in closing is that I'm not an expert in this. I've read a really good book, I've interviewed a few experts, and I fished with one. But just reading that book has led me to some of the same areas and bodies of water that experts fish, and I can't think of a more ringing endorsement. I truly believe that if you read this book and internalize it, follow some of the steps, it'll put you in the top 5% of anglers and their understanding of the periodical cicada hatch. Thank you, Dave, for writing it.
And how that fire's burning wild, but it can't keep up with your touch. So, girl,